KwaZulu-Natal magistrate who's heading a sexual offences court has been flagged for giving lenient sentences to men accused of sexually abusing minors. It's reported that many of her court sentences are being set aside by other judges who believe that the accused should be given harsher sentences. For more on this, we're joined by Child Protection Lead at Save the Children South Africa, Ms. Divya Naidoo. Ms. Naidoo, thank you very much for availing yourself this afternoon. So in one of the instances, the magistrate gave the accused a 2-year wholly suspended sentence conditional on him paying compensation of a mere 1,000 rand. What we are seeing here, is this the exception to the rule, or is this rife in our courts?
I think in this particular case, it seems to be a rule with this particular magistrate, because it's not the first incident this has happened. And by the way, good afternoon, Dudu, and to your viewers, and thank you for having us on. We're really shocked by this particular set of rulings that we're hearing about, because what it says is that, that something as heinous and as terrible as this is acceptable. So yes, it is not a rule that should be happening.
Elsewhere, they say that the courts had to be careful about awarding compensatory damages, as this could, rile up the community. What are the consequences of this, not just for the community, I guess, but more specifically for these minors who have been severely violated and traumatized?
You see, Didi, we must understand in this context the system of sentencing within our country. And we must understand also the scale of what goes on before it gets to that point. So when a child reports a violation and abuse that has taken place against them, and particularly with sexual abuse as the particular type of abuse, very few cases actually end up going to court. And so this is also particularly concerning for us when rulings like this are made. When sentence happens and when somebody is found guilty and the sentence has happened to the perpetrator, there is one of the principles within our sentencing rule in South Africa is to look at retribution or reparation, which in essence talks about, so what does the perpetrator need to do to make up to this victim? And so when we look at, in this particular case, the nature of it, where that particular reparation or retribution is of such a small amount compared to the extent of the violation and what impact this incident or incidence has on the child, which is lifelong damage. When this is placed at the court, and particularly in this case where it was not even asked for by the prosecutor. And while we understand that the magistrate has discretionary powers, the concern is when this amount is so low. It is absolutely improper to allow an individual to go unpunished. That is what the law is saying when it comes to the issue around retribution. But there has to be some sense of balance about what's acceptable and what is not. To have complete suspended sentences and it is conveying a message also that it's not so bad. It isn't something that's a big problem. And we as society are saying, yes, it is. The other component of sentencing and the principles that has to be considered by a judge is to look at what's called symbolic denunciation, which in essence talks about how do we convey society's feelings about something, about basic values by which we live in society. And in this case, it's a total violation of children's rights. And we as a country uphold this right. So when we're saying that it's acceptable for somebody to get away with a wholly suspended sentence and to get away with low amounts of repayment, we demean the impact that this has on children. And particularly in the face of the fact that there are so few matters that actually reach this point. And research has shown very small percentages of actual abuse reaches the point of court, and even less conviction rate. And so when courts who have the power to actually deal with something and make this as a deterrent for future, which is the third of the principles of sentencing. It actually it's very demeaning for children, it's demeaning for children's rights, and it's passing a very, very frightful message to perpetrators and others out there that it is okay for us to abuse children and we can get away with it.
Ms. Naidoo, let's further complicate, I beg your pardon, please allow me to come in there. Let's further complicate what you call what is acceptable versus what is unacceptable. So just on Monday, a man was sentenced. That's after he was found guilty of repeatedly raping his stepdaughter. Now, the mother of this child then begged the court not to send this man to jail because she depends on him financially. From the work that you do, how much of a problem is that?
You see, this is something where the court has discretion. This is where court has discretion, and one has to make very informed decisions. I think, and that is why judges are chosen, because they have the power to be able to make sound judgments. And yes, there is a concern around dependency. There is a concern around which makes it even harder in terms of when judgments have to be made. But one has to look at what are the implications for children. In the Children's Act and in Section 28 of our Constitution, we talk about what is in the best interest of the child. And that is of paramount interest. So when the courts make a judgment, they have to look at, so what is in the best interest of this child? That is why even in the Children's Act, in the past, children were removed from the home. And it was a double violation for children, where it felt like there was secondary victimization because they had to leave the home, leave school, not be with other family members when that kind of abuse took place in the home. So the Children's Act then protected children and said, if the perpetrator is in the home, the perpetrator needs to leave the home. And yes, you will get the other parent who sometimes is totally dependent, but the court has to find other ways in which families can still be supported, but at the same time ensure that the best interest of the child is held at the highest in that decision-making process. It has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis.
The detail, just reading through the detail of some of the judgments and what these people are accused of, it's very difficult to read. So I asked, maybe with relation to this particular magistrate that has been accused of giving lenient sentences and also lenient fines, what consequences are there for her?
You see, my understanding, and I can't dictate how the court system would work and what they would do, but the key thing is that the process has been under review. The specific case was apparently anonymously reported, and that's how that was picked up. But there's a process currently happening where there's further reviews of other matters that has been judgments that were made by this particular magistrate. And I think the courts then need to, the review panel or who was responsible for that would need to then make some decisions about what should happen in terms of the way forward and follow their, and I couldn't quite say disciplinary processes, but their processes, the human resource processes that they have in place to look at that. You see, there's a very rigorous process of when a judge is selected and when somebody is actually put on the bench at any level of courts. And this is a very special court that is set aside to look at sensitive matters, to look at matters relating to children in particular. And sometimes, unfortunately, in my own experience in the past, children's court was felt like it was the punishment court, that somebody just got dumped in because they did something wrong. And the key message, I think, in the way this matter is handled is that this is critical. This is as high a court as other courts that deal with other severe crimes as well, because this is a severe crime, but it's more sensitive in nature. because it involves children, and the nature of the violation against children has lifelong effects on these children. And therefore, we have to be able to look at, so what does this mean? What does this mean for children? What is the impact on them? And therefore, courts need to go back. In this particular case, they need to take it very seriously and follow what we would call due process as per their own procedures. But I think there's something else that needs to happen as a learning lesson from this, is what do they do when magistrates are appointed to courts that relate to children, and to reflect on what kind of training has been happening, where the gaps are in training, and then to reach out to organizations that work closely with children. So there are organizations like Childline that provide very extensive training for court officials, prosecutors, for magistrates, and call upon them to support the court process in training people who are responsible for making these decision-making processes.
Ms. Divya Naidoo, thank you very much, ma'am. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we can afford today. Child Protection Lead at Save the Children.